My original brief was to talk about results emanating out of the Deer Progeny Test, but I sort of had a hard think about it, and I thought, well, for two reasons, 10 minutes wasn't going to do justice to that. Also, the Deer Progeny Test is a project in motion, and this time next year, I hope to be able to stand up here and give you some pretty stunning results about new options for trait selection in the Deer Progeny Test. I will cover some of the stuff in it, though, but what I thought would be more valuable would be to give you an overview of a number of genetics projects that sit within our program. Now, I want to acknowledge right from the start that the deer industry in New Zealand is very, very fortunate in the calibre of the stud breeders that drive genetic progress in our industry. I can't think of any other industry has made the gains that it has over just a short period, 30 years or so. My job is to support those stud breeders and add value to their business through providing tools and options around genetic management. I acknowledge that they will make good progress without us, but my job is to add those tools to make that progress more faster. My other job is for those of you that source their genetic material from the top tier stud industry, is to have confidence in them that what they are supplying to you is good genetics. And so what I want to talk about today, and it will be a brief overview, is those tools around genetic selection. This accounts for over 40% of my budget for research is in genetic management. So it's a biggie. The Productivity Improvement Program has identified that genetic progress is one of the biggies in terms of productivity and profitability gains in the industry, and so we've taken that on board. So the three things I want to talk today about: DaSelect, Deer Progeny Test, and the new one, DaLink, and explain what they are and what they mean to the industry. So what is DaSelect? DaSelect's a tool. It's not a research project, it's a tool. It's there for the life of the industry as long as you want it. It grew out of a combination of stud breeder interest and research, and is the national database for and the analytical tool for calculating genetic merit of animals. So it's there to make informed decisions, or allow people to make informed decisions about sire stag use and purchase to maximise genetic gain for whatever economic trait's important. It's a national database and analytical tool embedded within the Sheep Improvement Limited engine, and it takes breeder inputted data on deer pedigree and performance and uses that to calculate genetic worth. Key outputs that are relevant to farmers are the sire rankings for the various traits of interest. So there's more than one trait. It's not just about growth, there are other traits as well, and that will grow over time. And it presents these as breeding values, or more latterly as indexes, economic indexes. Most of you are more familiar with breeding values, and with very strong emphasis on a valid between-herd connectiveness, so that the comparisons in breeding values between stags, between herds, are on the same footing. That's very important because we all know that in genetics there's a strong environmental effect when selecting. In one farm, treating animals differently from another farm, we've got to take that effect out and show what the true worth is, and we do that through sire linkage. Breeding values and indexes are updated, I think, quarterly. Sorry, I didn't check that. It might be actually more frequently now. And the latest, using the latest inputted data, so it's always a reiteration using the latest data, and that's available to all farmers through the website. What is the Deer Progeny Test? Okay, the Deer Progeny Test is not a tool, it's a project. So it has a defined life. It's there to support DaSelect and has other functions as well. So the DaPT is a 3 breeding cycle or 3-year research project, so 3 AI seasons, of which we've just completed we completed the last AI season last year. And so the crop of progeny, the last crop of progeny are on the ground now and being recorded. It's quite large. It's 800 hinds per year and 11 stags tested per year. a very important thing, though, it is not operated on stud farms, it is operated on commercial farms. And I really want to acknowledge that this was no mean feat for those commercial farmers that participated. That's White Rock Station and Halden, and we also use the Invermay farm. You've got to remember, these aren't stud breeders, these are commercial farmers who were prepared to allow us to use their farms for quite a difficult process. 400 AIs per farm per year. It's a big call. But the idea was that these evaluations would be made in real life commercial situations rather than just on the stud farms, but by doing so we're also be able to use them for the linkage through the stud farms as well. The primary aims of the DPT, firstly to encourage and improve sire linkage between the herds, and that's bolded because I'm going to talk about that. It's a platform to evaluate breeding values across breeds. Now that's work in progress. We hope that we can get to the point we're not talking about red deer and wapiti, that we can have valid comparisons between them for production systems. And there are things happening there that I dare say will be quite a feature next year. 3, to evaluate new traits for optimisation selection goals. So it's not just about bigger and better, it's about better. And there's lots of things that contribute to better. And I'll discuss some of that as well. That's why that's bolded there as well. It's a starting point for the evaluation of maternal traits. Now, we don't record maternal traits particularly well across the country. And so by getting it started in DPT, we hope to encourage more of the breeders to input data on hinds that we can then start looking at the longer term maternal effects. What is the right live weight? How long do they live? That sort of thing. And fifthly, and a little bit further down the line, this population of animals is an incredible, valuable resource to the deer industry as we move into future genomic tools based around DNA. And next year I hope that we'll start that discussion in earnest about what those options are, but it's things like genomic breeding values, SNP chip, being able to identify the genes on the chromosomes that actually cause function. They are part of the actual mechanisms driving genetic gain. So the immediate benefit from the DPT, even in year 1, by inputting data, was to have a very significant improvement on sire linkage, particularly for growth, reproduction, and the few meat yields that we've already had on the system. It's increased the number of herds linked on DaSelect, and it's increased the quality of linkage between herds. So comparing the runs of 3 years of progeny data prior to DPT data have been added for red and wapiti. Just to show you what it's done to linkage. Now this is what we call a linkage diagram. And if you look at the green line running down, anything to that side of it is linked. Anything to this side of it is not linked at all. The further you go over that way, the better linked you are. So it's on a sort of scale. And as you can see, there is a reasonable amount of linkage. I think the deer industry and the stud breeders have done a huge job in getting linkage. But a lot of it was driven out of the sire reference scheme that we had 8 or 9 years ago, and then it actually will start to dwindle. So what the DPT has done in the first year is it's pushed it over that way. There are no unlinked deer herds on DaSelect. Of the 24 herds on there, they're all linked. Now, what's happening this year is that linkage is moving further over that way. We're getting better linkage. That's for red deer. Wapiti, we don't have as many herds under the wapiti side of things, and they were poorly linked. Only 2 herds actually linked. Now we have 8 herds, and we've got much better linkage, but we've still got a fair degree of improvement that to be generated over the next 2 or 3 years as the data comes online. So that gives you the faith that when you look at BVs between farms, you say, yeah, that's a real effect, and I will buy that stag. There are new traits being measured in the DPT, which will be analysed over the next 12 months as we get the full complement of data from 3 years of progeny. There's a minimum data set size before we can do that, where we look at these traits, we work out the heritability, how much of that variation we see is heritable, and how we go about setting up breeding values and providing you breeding values that you can start selecting for new traits that have economic value. So carcass traits, and I'm going to acknowledge Alliance here, particularly at their Makarewa plant, have been incredibly helpful in this. I'm also going to acknowledge Deer Improvement Limited, who added to this data set by putting animals from their progeny test through the same process. We've recorded over 60 measured traits on carcasses, of which will be, by the end of this year, over 1,000 animals through the plant. And we've also measured co-products. These are all animals we know the size of. We've been measuring host resistance or resilience to parasites using the Kala test, and I have to say the initial analysis of that looked very promising from heritability perspective. Now we have to put together what does it mean in terms of profitability to the industry. We've been measuring temperament traits. It's an interesting one. I can talk all night about it. I won't. But we all hold views on temperament. They're all different too, by the way. But it's an important thing we start getting a handle on what it means and if we can select for temperament, and also the maternal traits. By December this year, we'll have this last slaughter of 3 years progeny, and we'll have a full valid data set for the analysis. That's why I'm saying next year I hope to stand in front of you here with some quite staggering stuff. Yep. What is DaLink? Very quickly, DaLink's a new project. We know from past experience that when the DaPT finishes, the probability is without some intervention, linkage will fall apart again. It did after the site reference scheme. DaLink is a combination of science and industry coming together for a few years to keep that linkage viable, and then science will exit it and industry will take it over. So it's a collaboration between us and the DaSelect manager, that's Sharon, she's here. She's organising the industry side of it to make sure they swap the stags and the semen and get that linkage. We're providing a miniature DaPT to help that process through for the next 3 years at maximum. But it could, our part of it could finish earlier if the industry's picking up the cudgels on that one, and it does seem to be. It's about the industry taking full responsibility then for managing linkage, and that frees up science to start looking at other things, new traits, and new research options around genetics. And complicated diagram that I stole from one of Mandy Bill's things, and it's a little bit old now because DaLink's not in there, but a lot of people going into this, a lot of collaborations. Even the stud breeders, they donate semen to the project. You know, semen worth thousands of dollars to help the industry forward. I want to acknowledge that. They're big players in this, but there's a lot of other partners as well, and I haven't got time to go through them all, but I want to acknowledge them and I want to thank them. Thank you.
This is actually quite an exciting time for the deer industry. We're actually starting to get the ability to measure some base metrics, to measure productivity improvements and things. So we've got the microphones coming around. There's one question over here.
Yeah, thanks, Geoff. It's certainly good. Andy Jardin, Wanganui. It's good to hear that you're doing some of your progeny testing now in harder hill country, because, you know, I've always been sceptical of the BVs that have been published by stud breeders, stag stud breeders, who are publishing BVs from country and testing that's been done on class 1 flat country. As we know, 90% of our breeding herds now have been pushed out to the harder hill country, and you take some of those stags who perform really well on class 1 country, put them on hard hill country, and their progeny won't perform. So it's great to hear that you're actually going to give us some meaningful BVs now, because I don't think that what we're getting so far up to date has been that meaningful, because they don't apply to hard hill country farmers.
Yeah, thanks for that feedback. And our philosophy was, take them out of the licorice all sorts and asparagus tips feeding program and put them into something that's real. But to be honest, I don't know it will show that things will tip over. I think the stud farms generally run a realistic operation, but it's still important for your confidence that we show that in a real life commercial situation. And you know, Halden Station, White Rock Station are high country, dry country properties. You know, they're tough environments, and if they can perform well there, then there's every confidence that, you know, the genetics you're getting are going to perform on your farm as well.
Thanks. We'll keep moving on, but luckily Geoff's giving the next speech, so we don't have to do much of a changeover. So the next speech is, the next presentation is on hind body condition score and effect on lactation. So thanks, Geoff.
Not really my talk. This is one of David Stevens' trial. I really like it. But Dave gives his apologies for not being able to be here. It's a very busy time for us at the moment, and I've got people all over the planet almost doing bits and pieces. And you know, in the next 3 weeks I've got to scan 7,000 hinds for one of my trials, so this time of year it's quite tough, but he really, really would have liked to have given us. It's quite different what I just talked about. This is a discrete trial. It's quite a small trial, but I think, you know, it has some nice simple messages in it about how we manage our deer. And it really came from discussions we had about drought. Every one of us here has suffered from drought, even in areas where we don't expect to get droughts. And just talk to the Waikato people at the moment. They're hard to predict, well, they're not predictable, to be honest, and when they hit, they can hit really bad. And so we started thinking about how can we better manage for the risks of drought with our animals. You know, so how do we plan for drought conditions over calving and lactation, because the impacts are very severe. Somehow we need to buffer the hind and the calf to ensure that optimal growth occurs and that we minimise severe body loss in the hinds just prior to the rut. But we also know that hinds naturally prepare for lactation by increasing fat reserves over pregnancy. And therefore we thought, well, can we use body condition score as a tool to prevent or minimise production losses during drought? And it's a very simple concept of how body condition score of the hind at calving time impacts on the performance over the next 3 months in the face of various environmental conditions. So good or bad seasons. And we did this study on FMA using 240 of our hinds, and we put them into 2 pre-calving groups. One we called the restricted group, where we controlled the feed to the point that we kept their body condition score down to 2.5 by the time they started calving. And the other group we called the ad lib group, where we aimed to put them on very good feed and get their body condition score up to 3.5 at the time of calving. And then when calving came, we split both of those groups so that there were 60 animals in each of those groups that were put on high or low pasture allowances to mimic good or bad seasons over the next 110 days. And just to show that we did actually impose a substantial difference in the pasture allowance over calving, this is the actual measured pasture covers from just before calving through to the end of the study. And you see a substantial difference. So those are the actuals. So we achieved that. And I realise when you put more than 2 lines on a graph, it's very hard to follow. So what I want to just quickly take you through this one, and you'll be able to follow the others a little bit easier. But the red represents those animals that were ad lib fed to make sure they attained a good body condition score at the start of calving. So around here, or in this case we're looking at live weight, but I'll show you the body condition score as well. And then they were split so that one group got put onto high allowance, this group here, and that group put on low allowance. The black are the animals that started off pretty poor, so you see at the start of calving their live weights reflect that. And then that group that went on to high allowance, even though they're on poor body condition score, and that went on low allowance. And you can see a clear separation occurred here that reflected the feed available. But it's getting into the details of that that's important. This is it in body condition score, and important I use that because that's the whole basis of this. It's the tools that you will use. And so, pressed the wrong button. Is that right? Body condition score. So here again in the red, the animals at high body condition score and the changes to their condition score over that lactation under those different environments. You'll notice that firstly the animals at high body condition score and a high level allowance maintain their condition score all the way through. those that started off high and went on low allowance plummeted quite fast. So they were under pressure. Interestingly, when you look at those that started off at a low condition score at calving just here, when put on a high plain allowance and lactated, were still able to put on good body condition score, which kind of surprised us. We thought they'd a bit of a trade-off there. But then when put on to a low allowance, actually maintained their low body condition score. They didn't plummet any further. So some interesting dynamics going on there. But the crunch is really the calves they produced, and this is where you get this separation coming out here, which is really interesting. So the animals on a high allowance after calving, irrespective on a high allowance, irrespective of their body condition score when they started, were able to grow their calves very well. The animals that were on high condition score, but were put on very restricted feeding, mimicking our drought conditions, didn't do too badly until about day 80, and then the calf growth rate started to minimise. So they were able to buffer those conditions from their fat for about 80 days and still maintain a modest amount of body condition score. But let's be honest about it, you know, at that point, the realistic management is to start supplementary feeding because they can only buffer so far. But when you look at this, this is a real telltale one. Going into a calving and lactation with low body condition score in a drought is disastrous on calf growth. So very significant. What's really interesting, when we measured the grass intake by the calves at about 80 to 100 days, this is the effect you get. These three here, there's no significant difference in the amount of grass that the calves ate. And this is not the hinds, this is the calves. But this group here were eating a lot more grass. What's that tell us? It tells us that the hind has stopped lactating. That calf has to compensate by eating more grass. Not a lot of grass there in the first place. What's the best thing you can do? Wean it, because she's not getting much feed from the hinds. So when you see that classical pattern where the grass intakes rocket away like that, you know that they're substituting milk or substituting grass for milk. So it's a very clear message there. So the implications of this, and this is my final slide, is that pre-calving body condition does count. It can be used as a tool to minimise, but not completely obliterate, the effects of drought. It is a risk management tool that you should employ. We see no downside of it. But be aware that in severe drought situations, the best body condition score in the world will only buffer the system for about 80 days. And that's the point at which you need to have in place another risk management strategy around supplementary feeding the hinds. And also remember that by not compensating for drought conditions, the hinds will come out at the end of it with a very low body condition score. That has implications for when they conceive, and that compounds the effect for next year if they're later calving. So very clear and simple message, but I think a very strong one. And I think the message is, if you want to plan around risk management around drought, use body condition score, maximise or optimise it just prior to calving to buffer the system. But don't forget that supplementary feeding is still part of that equation. Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Thanks very much. What were the body condition scores in a number for the ad-lib feeding, low feeding?
As a number? Yeah. Oh, the group we ad-lib fed, we aim to get them up to 3.5 at point of calving, and the restricted feed, our aim in an experimental model was to get them to 2.5. So 2.5 is not severely low, but it is still going in with relatively low fat reserves into a calving situation.
Geoff, did David carry on that work for conceptions of those hinds? So my question is around high body weight and rising plane and low body weight and rising plane, they had different body condition scores at weaning, but similar weaning weights. So was the body condition score at weaning relevant to conception date and conception time?
No, we didn't. We had to recover those hinds and put them into an AI program, so we lost that opportunity. But one of the most brilliant opportunities that came out of this for me was a bunch of female weaners that differed from 45 kilograms to 55 kilograms, and I'm using those weaners in a study on puberty and the effects of retarded growth early in life, how it influences puberty. So there was a good spin-off from that. And I hope next year I'll also give you some stunning stuff on that as well. Yep. No, unfortunately, we didn't want to interfere. Because we're putting animals under a stress situation, we thought the best thing was to keep out of the paddocks at calving, so we didn't get calving date. What we did, though, is we balanced the groups for expected calving date based on fetal age scanning, but acknowledging that one of the consequences of reducing body condition score in the low group may be to extend gestation length out a little bit and have a slightly later calving. We couldn't see a way to compensate for that. But I think what you do is you factor that in as part of the equation anyway, as part of your risk management, is to get the condition score up so you minimise the chances that they'll have a later calving or longer gestation. I wish I had that data, to be perfectly honest. We didn't find it particularly hard to get that condition score on for the last 2 months of gestation, which is entirely logical because that's generally when there's a period of feed surplus, or the ability to provide ad libitum feeding is much easier than earlier in pregnancy. And logically, if you look at it, naturally, that's when hinds will put on weight. I think the fact we have animals coming into calving at body condition scores as low as 2.5 says we are probably actively working against the animal sometimes. So it's a relatively easy process if you plan it to put body condition score on through that sort of September, October, November period. We were surprised how easy it was.